Damn, it was like the highway itself had a secret agenda, he thought, his heart hammering as he forced his eyes to remain fixed on the surreal sight ahead. The busy freeway, usually a blur of familiar faces and routine commutes, had become the stage for something utterly inexplicable. Michael, a middle-aged commuter with a penchant for early morning drives, never imagined that a seemingly ordinary Tuesday would morph into a disquieting tale of urban mystery. Michael had been driving for nearly an hour when he first noticed the anomaly. The asphalt stretched out like a predictable friend, yet something was off. A series of stray blocks, concrete pieces that had no business being there, lined a stretch of the highway. They weren't the result of a construction mishap or debris from an accident, but rather, they appeared meticulously placed, as if by design. He recalled glancing at the roadside where the blocks sat arranged with a disturbing symmetry. They exuded an aura of deliberate purpose, an inexplicable presence that set his pulse racing. The initial shock gave way to a creeping dread. Michael's mind raced with questions: who had placed them? What were they protecting? And why, in the midst of a bustling, chaotic highway, had these blocks become the silent guardians of something unseen? His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he adjusted his rearview mirror, half expecting to see a security camera or an official crew arriving to explain the bizarre setup. Instead, the highway remained eerily silent, the usual cacophony of honks and murmurs dampened by the tension in the air. He slowed down, inching his car toward a rest area that had suddenly seemed the only safe refuge from the unsettling scene. The highway, usually a symbol of modernity and relentless progress, had transformed into a canvas of surrealism. Michael's journey, which had begun like any other mundane drive, now felt like the opening scene of a psychological thriller. Every detail, the harsh glare of the rising sun against the concrete, the distant murmur of traffic blending with his own racing thoughts, was imbued with a sense of foreboding that he couldn't shake. As he pulled into the modest, nearly empty parking lot of the rest stop, Michael's mind replayed the moment over and over again. The blocks, arranged with precision, seemed to tell a story. Their placement was deliberate, each piece carefully positioned to form a barrier of sorts. But what was it protecting? Or was it a warning? He couldn't decide which thought was more unsettling. The blocks radiated a cold, unyielding presence that seemed to press against the normalcy of the everyday, merging the banal with the bizarre. Michael parked his car and stepped out into the crisp morning air, the early rays of the sun catching the glint of dew on the concrete blocks as if illuminating a hidden code. The world around him was quiet, too quiet for a highway that usually buzzed with the energy of countless lives in transit. He walked slowly toward the edge of the parking lot, his eyes drawn back to the highway where the blocks lay like silent sentinels. Each step felt weighted with an unspoken urgency, as though he were walking into a story already in motion, one that would unravel in unexpected ways. In that moment, he remembered a conversation from years past with an old truck driver who had spoken of strange occurrences on the roads, events that defied simple explanations. The driver's voice had been low and full of conviction, as if he had witnessed something that shook him to his core. Michael had dismissed it as roadside folklore then, a story meant to entertain weary travelers. But now, staring at the enigmatic blocks, he couldn't help but wonder if there was a grain of truth in those old tales, a truth that was as unsettling as it was undeniable. The highway itself, with its never-ending procession of vehicles and its stoic, unchanging architecture, now bore a stark contrast between the familiar and the alien. Michael took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in his chest. The blocks, with their rough edges and unyielding texture, seemed to defy the natural order of things. They were an intrusion into the fluidity of everyday life, a reminder that even in the most routine settings, the unexpected could emerge without warning. A few minutes later, as Michael stood at the edge of the lot, a low hum began to permeate the air, a sound that was at once mechanical and almost organic in its rhythm. It was as if the highway itself were waking up, reacting to the presence of these mysterious barriers. The hum grew louder, resonating through the concrete and vibrating beneath his feet. Michael's skin prickled as he listened, feeling that the sound carried with it an unspoken warning. He scanned the horizon, half expecting to see a convoy of emergency vehicles or a team of officials rushing to secure the scene, but there was nothing. Only the continuous, unnerving vibration that now seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. Despite the disquiet, curiosity propelled Michael forward. He returned to his car, deciding that the best way to understand the situation was to see it up close. As he drove back onto the highway, the blocks loomed larger in his peripheral vision, their stark presence punctuating the otherwise unremarkable stretch of road. Other drivers, too, began to notice. Horns blared intermittently, and a few vehicles swerved erratically, their drivers gripped by the same mix of alarm and bewilderment. The highway, now a microcosm of frenzied emotion, became a tableau of shock and confusion. Michael maintained a steady speed, his eyes locked on the scene ahead. The blocks, once mere curiosities, now evoked a palpable tension, a silent challenge to the normal order of things. He couldn't help but feel that they were guarding something, or perhaps preventing something worse from unfolding. The idea gnawed at him, a disquieting thought that something malevolent had been held at bay by these seemingly innocuous obstacles. The blocks were not random, they were a deliberate intervention, and the very sight of them left drivers momentarily stunned, their minds struggling to reconcile the ordinary with the extraordinary. As the sun climbed higher, casting long, angular shadows across the highway, Michael's journey took on the quality of a descent into an urban labyrinth. The blocks, now bathed in the stark light of day, appeared almost ghostly, silent markers of a boundary between the known and the unknown. Every detail was magnified, the rough surface of the concrete, the slight displacement in their alignment, the subtle interplay of light and shadow that hinted at depths beyond the visible. The highway, in its ceaseless flow of metal and motion, had become a stage for an enigmatic drama, and Michael felt like an unwilling audience to an event that defied logical explanation. The calm of the morning was punctuated by moments of sudden, inexplicable strangeness. At one point, a car skidded to a halt mere feet from a cluster of blocks, its driver's frantic expressions mirrored in the terrified glances exchanged between onlookers. In another instance, a delivery truck attempted to maneuver around the blocks but ended up narrowly missing a collision, the near miss igniting a series of rapid, anxious exchanges among the drivers. Every incident, no matter how minor, contributed to an atmosphere charged with uncertainty and dread. Michael's thoughts churned as he pieced together the fragments of the unfolding mystery. There was no visible sign of human intervention, no tape, no cautionary signs, no official markers that would indicate an orchestrated effort by traffic authorities. Yet the blocks were unmistakably there, their presence a silent testament to a decision made somewhere between rationality and desperation. The more he observed, the more he felt that this was not an accident, nor a mere accident of circumstance. It was as if the highway had been momentarily suspended in time, a space where the rules of normality were suspended by an unseen force. Driving slowly, Michael noticed that the pattern of the blocks subtly changed as he moved along the highway. They began to form configurations that hinted at deliberate geometric shapes, lines that converged, angles that created a sense of directionality. It was as if they were pointing toward something, a hidden truth obscured by the chaos of daily life. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. Had these blocks been placed to protect the drivers, or to warn them away from an impending danger? The ambiguity was maddening, each possibility more disquieting than the last. As he neared an overpass that spanned a winding river, the hum that had haunted him earlier receded into a low, almost imperceptible murmur. The overpass, a familiar landmark in his daily commute, now took on an unfamiliar, foreboding aspect. Michael slowed his car to a crawl, his eyes scanning the expanse below. The river, normally a placid ribbon of silver under the morning sun, appeared restless, its surface disrupted by unseen currents. The juxtaposition of the steady flow of traffic above and the turbulent water below created a visual metaphor that resonated deeply within him, a reminder that beneath the veneer of order, chaos often lurked. For Michael, every detail now carried the weight of a larger, unspoken narrative. The blocks, the hum, the altered expressions of passing drivers, all were threads in a tapestry of events that defied conventional explanation. The highway had become a crucible of emotion and memory, a place where everyday routines were shattered by the intrusion of the inexplicable. And as he continued his slow, cautious drive, Michael felt the boundaries between his own reality and something more elusive begin to blur. There was a moment, as he navigated a particularly narrow stretch of road, when the world seemed to hold its breath. In that fleeting interval, the steady drone of engines faded into silence, and Michael could almost swear that the blocks themselves pulsed with a quiet, rhythmic energy. It was a sensation that defied logic, a convergence of fear and wonder that left him momentarily disoriented. The familiar became strange, and the mundane, imbued with a haunting significance. Every mile Michael traversed that day was marked by the tension of the unknown. The highway, with its routine rhythms and predictable cadence, had been transformed into a realm where every shadow and every unexpected obstacle whispered of secrets too immense to fully comprehend. Yet, amidst the rising anxiety, there lingered an undeniable magnetism, a pull that beckoned him to uncover the truth hidden in plain sight. In that early hour, under a sky that was turning from soft pinks to harsh blues, Michael's journey was not just about getting from one place to another. It was a voyage into the heart of an urban enigma, a personal confrontation with the inexplicable forces that sometimes break through the veneer of everyday life. The blocks, silent and unyielding, stood as both guardians and warnings, a paradox that left every driver, including Michael, reeling with questions and an insatiable need for answers. The morning light, growing ever stronger, cast stark contrasts on the highway. The block's rough surfaces were bathed in light and shadow, their presence a constant reminder of the fragile boundary between normalcy and the extraordinary. Michael's mind, still reeling from the initial shock, began to assemble a mental mosaic of the events, the deliberate placement of obstacles, the sudden bursts of chaos, and the inexplicable harmony of danger and protection all merged into one unyielding narrative. As he finally pulled off the highway onto a quiet side road, Michael allowed himself a brief moment of respite. He parked along the shoulder, his car a temporary sanctuary from the relentless pace of the highway. Leaning against the cool metal of his vehicle, he replayed the events of the morning in his mind, each detail seared into his memory. The blocks, the hum, the frantic energy of fellow drivers, each element was a piece of a puzzle he was desperate to solve. In that reflective solitude, Michael knew one undeniable truth: the highway had revealed something profound about the nature of everyday life, a reminder that even in the most familiar settings, the unexpected could upend everything in an instant. The blocks, with their silent, stoic defiance, had not merely protected, they had provoked, questioned, and forever altered the rhythm of that busy highway. And as he sat there, the residue of shock mingling with a newfound determination, Michael realized that this was only the beginning of a story that demanded to be told, a story where the ordinary would collide with the inexplicable, leaving an indelible mark on all who encountered it. The drive back into the flow of traffic was cautious, each maneuver calculated as if he were navigating through an intricate maze of subtle threats. Michael's mind churned with possibilities, each more haunting than the last. In that charged moment, the highway was no longer just a passage for vehicles, it had become a crucible where hidden truths were distilled in the interplay of light, sound, and the inexplicable presence of stray blocks. And though the morning promised the routine bustle of a busy day, Michael knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. Michael's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel. His mind still reeled from the sight of the blocks, their eerie, deliberate placement burning in his thoughts. He drove on autopilot, barely registering the world outside the car window, the blur of trees, the rhythmic patterns of white lane dividers, the indistinct faces of fellow drivers who had also witnessed the bizarre obstruction. He wasn't the only one shaken. Every few minutes, he caught glimpses of other motorists, their expressions tight, their movements stiff. Something about the scene had rattled them too. Some drivers had pulled off the road entirely, standing beside their cars, rubbing their foreheads or talking animatedly into their phones. Others had slowed their pace, as if afraid the road itself might betray them. Michael's stomach churned. There was something deeply unsettling about the way everything had unfolded. He had expected someone, anyone, to intervene. A police car, a road maintenance crew, even a curious pedestrian with a camera. But the blocks had remained untouched. No one had dared move them. And that was what bothered him the most. A few miles ahead, he noticed a gas station perched just off the exit ramp. It was the kind of place that had probably looked modern a few decades ago but now stood faded and weary, a relic of a time when road trips meant more than just getting from one place to another. The fluorescent lights inside flickered weakly, casting an anemic glow over the asphalt. Michael didn't need gas. He barely needed a break. But something pulled him toward that station, an urge, an instinct, or maybe just the lingering unease coiled in his chest like a titan spring. He signaled, took the exit, and rolled up beside the worn-out convenience store. As he stepped out, the gas station's glass door swung open with a creak, and a man in a stained blue uniform leaned against the frame, lighting a cigarette. He was older, with deep lines carved into his face, the kind of expression that said he had seen just about everything there was to see on the open road. Michael hesitated for a moment, then took a step forward. "Hey," he started, his voice hoarse from the dry air and the lingering anxiety. "You, see anything weird on the highway this morning?" The man exhaled a thin stream of smoke, watching it curl into the morning air before turning his gaze toward Michael. His eyes were sharp, scanning him in a way that made Michael feel like he was being measured, assessed. "Guess that depends on what you call weird," the man finally said, tapping the ash off the end of his cigarette. Michael frowned. He didn't want to sound like a lunatic, but he needed to talk to someone who might confirm that he hadn't imagined it all. "The blocks," he said. "Concrete blocks. Just sitting in the middle of the highway. Perfectly lined up. No warning signs, no construction crew. Just there." For a long moment, the man didn't speak. His face remained unreadable, the cigarette burning low between his fingers. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he flicked the remainder of it onto the ground and crushed it under his boot. "Yeah," he said, almost absent-mindedly. "I've seen them before." Michael blinked. His pulse quickened. "You have?" The man nodded but didn't elaborate. Instead, he pushed himself off the doorframe and walked back inside the store, leaving Michael standing there, the unanswered question hanging thick in the air. A wave of frustration surged through him. He wasn't in the mood for cryptic responses, not after the morning he'd had. He followed the man inside. The store was dimly lit, with shelves stocked in a haphazard way that suggested nobody really cared about organization. A small TV sat in the corner behind the counter, playing an old news broadcast on mute. Michael approached the counter. "Look, man," he said, lowering his voice. "I don't know what's going on, but if you know something." The attendant held up a hand. "You want coffee?" Michael faltered. "What?" "Coffee." The man gestured toward an ancient-looking pot sitting on a hot plate near the register. "Tastes like shit, but it helps when you've seen something you can't quite explain." Michael hesitated, then exhaled. "Yeah. Sure." The man poured 2 cups. The scent of burnt beans filled the air. Michael took a sip and winced. It really was terrible. But the warmth steadied his nerves. The man leaned against the counter. "First time you've seen the blocks?" Michael nodded. "Figured," the man muttered. "You've got that look. The one people get when they see them for the first time." Michael set his cup down, his fingers drumming against the counter. "So what are they? Some kind of test? A warning? They're a line," the man interrupted. "A barrier. Not the kind you put up to keep something in. The kind you put up to keep something out." Michael's breath hitched. "Out?" The man nodded. "You ever notice how nobody touches them? Even the guys with big rigs, the ones who don't give a damn about much of anything, when they see the blocks, they swerve. They stop. They turn around. Michael thought back to the highway. The way drivers had hesitated, how even the most impatient ones had avoided the blocks like an unspoken rule dictated it. The man took a slow sip of his coffee, watching Michael over the rim of the cup. "You ever wonder why?" Michael swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. I don't know. I just thought." "You don't have to think," the man said. "You've already felt it." Michael clenched his jaw. He wanted to argue, to demand real answers, but deep down, he knew the man was right. He had felt it. The wrongness. The silent weight of something unspoken pressing down on that stretch of road. The way his gut had twisted, warning him that the blocks weren't just random debris. The man set his cup down with a quiet thud. "They show up sometimes," he said. "Always in different places, but always the same. And when they do, something doesn't get through." Michael's stomach turned. He thought of the sound he had heard earlier, the low hum, the vibration under his feet. Something. Not someone. Something. The man glanced toward the gas station's window, his gaze settling on the highway in the distance. "You're lucky, kid," he said. "You were on the right side of that line today." Michael's breath came shallow. "And the people on the wrong side?" The man didn't answer. He just took another sip of coffee and stared out at the road, as if waiting. Michael left the gas station with more questions than answers, the attendant's cryptic words echoing in his mind. As he merged back onto the highway, the rising sun cast long, eerie shadows across the asphalt, each beam of light carving into the concrete like a knife. The hum he'd heard earlier had returned, a low, persistent vibration that seemed to merge with the rhythm of his heartbeat. It was as if the entire highway were a living entity, its pulse syncing with the dread that called within him. The stretch of road ahead was a study in contrasts. On one side, the familiar, the orderly progression of cars, the predictable flow of traffic, the regular cadence of honking horns and murmuring voices. On the other, the inexplicable, those stray blocks, meticulously aligned, their presence an anomaly that defied the mundane order of daily commutes. Michael found himself constantly glancing in his rearview mirror, half expecting to catch a glimpse of the blocks shifting or the drivers behind him acting out of character. Instead, everyone moved with a hesitant caution, as though each had received an unspoken warning to keep their distance. He recalled the attendant's words, "They show up sometimes. Always in different places, but always the same. And when they do, something doesn't get through." The meaning of that statement gnawed at him. What was it that these blocks were keeping out? And why had they appeared now, on this particular morning, with such an air of inevitability? The highway began to curve gently toward a densely wooded area. Tall, ancient trees loomed on either side, their branches interlocking to form a natural archway that filtered the sunlight into delicate, shifting patterns. This was one of the few spots where the natural world seemed to intrude upon the engineered landscape of the road, a stark reminder that nature always had its own plan. Michael slowed his car, the engine's purr blending with the soft rustle of leaves. In that moment, the roadway seemed to whisper secrets of the past, tales of forgotten incidents and silent warnings that had been carried on the wind for decades. As he drove deeper into the wooded area, the blocks began to change subtly in their configuration. They weren't just isolated obstacles anymore, they formed a loose pattern, a path that seemed to lead toward the very heart of the forest. Michael's curiosity overcame his caution, and he found himself instinctively steering his car toward the path. The other vehicles on the highway appeared to avoid this particular lane, their drivers opting for routes that skirted the mysterious formation. It was as if an unspoken consensus had been reached among them, a silent agreement that this was not a path meant for ordinary travel. The further Michael ventured, the more palpable the atmosphere became. The air turned cool and heavy, carrying a faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Every detail of his surroundings felt hyperreal, the vividness of the scene imprinting itself on his senses. The stray blocks, bathed in the dappled light, seemed almost to glow against the dark, rich colors of the forest. They were no longer mere obstacles, they had transformed into ominous sentinels, marking the threshold between the safe familiarity of the highway and a realm where the rules of everyday life no longer applied. A sharp crack echoed through the trees, a branch breaking under its own weight, or perhaps a sign of something more deliberate. Michael's heart leaped in his chest. He pressed his foot against the accelerator, the car's engine roaring in protest as he navigated a winding, overgrown path that led further from the bustling highway. The interplay of light and shadow created illusions along the roadside, fleeting shapes that darted at the corner of his vision only to vanish when he tried to focus. Each twist and turn heightened his anxiety, while also compelling him to press on, driven by a need to understand the inexplicable pattern unfolding before him. After several minutes of tense, silent driving, Michael finally came upon a clearing. Here, the highway's relentless hum was replaced by an almost oppressive quiet. In the center of the clearing, a solitary structure rose, a weathered, brick building that seemed oddly out of place in this secluded natural setting. Its windows were dark and uninviting, and ivy clung to its walls like a desperate attempt to reclaim what had once been its domain. The building, clearly abandoned for years, exuded an air of quiet desolation and mystery. Parked at the edge of the clearing, Michael's car felt like a fragile sanctuary amid an environment that pulsed with latent menace. He stepped out into the crisp air, his boots crunching on the gravel path that led to the building's entrance. Each step felt weighted, as though the ground itself were reluctant to release him from its grip. The structure's door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly with every shift in the wind. Michael hesitated only a moment before pushing it open, driven by a compulsion to uncover the truth behind these unsettling events. Inside, the building was shrouded in darkness, its interior illuminated only by the shafts of light that managed to penetrate the broken windows. The air was thick with dust, each particle dancing in the beam of sunlight like tiny specters. Michael's footsteps echoed against the bare walls, the sound a stark reminder of his isolation in this forgotten place. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional groan of settling masonry, a sound that, in the quiet, seemed almost like a whispered warning. In the center of a large, open room, a series of old photographs lay scattered on a rusted table. Michael approached them slowly, his eyes drawn to the faded images as if they held clues to the building's past. There were pictures of the highway as it once was, a bustling corridor of life and movement. In one particularly striking photo, a group of construction workers were seen standing near a section of road that resembled the current formation of blocks. Their faces were solemn, their eyes betraying a shared sense of purpose and unease. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. These images were threads in a tapestry that stretched back through time, hinting at secrets long buried beneath the relentless passage of days. As he examined the photographs, Michael noticed that one image had been marked with a bold, red line, an arrow pointing directly toward the building's rear exit. The gesture was both simple and unsettling, as though someone had taken the time to annotate a message meant to be deciphered only by those who were truly paying attention. The discovery deepened Michael's resolve to understand the significance of the blocks and the strange events of the morning. He gathered the photographs carefully, tucking them under his arm as he made his way toward the exit. Outside, the contrast between the overgrown wilderness and the orderly highway was stark. The once familiar route had given way to a labyrinth of tangled underbrush and looming trees. Michael's car, now a distant speck against the vastness of nature, seemed almost insignificant in the face of the mystery that lay ahead. The stray blocks, visible in the distance from this new vantage point, had taken on an even more surreal quality, a bridge between the world of man and the enigmatic forces that lurked in the shadows of history. Driving back toward the highway, Michael felt an urgent need to piece together the fragments of his experience. Every detail, the spectral hum, the deliberate placement of the blocks, the cryptic words of the gas station attendant, and now the haunted photographs, formed a puzzle that defied easy explanation. The natural world around him, with its rustling leaves and shifting light, seemed to murmur secrets from long ago, urging him to look beyond the surface of everyday reality. As he re-entered the familiar flow of traffic, Michael couldn't help but notice how the highway now felt like a boundary between two distinct realms. On one side lay the predictable, the safe, the mundane, on the other, a world of hidden messages and unspoken warnings. His thoughts churned with the realization that he was caught in the middle of something much larger than a simple roadside anomaly, a phenomenon that questioned the very fabric of normalcy. The rest of his journey unfolded in a blur of introspection and heightened sensory awareness. Every car he passed, every driver who shed a brief, knowing glance in the rearview mirror, reinforced the idea that the events of the morning were part of a continuum, a recurring disruption that had etched itself into the collective memory of those who dared traverse the highway. Michael's mind raced with images and impressions as the landscape morphed between scenes of stark clarity and shifting, half-remembered dreams. There were moments during the drive when the blocks reappeared in his peripheral vision, each time with subtle variations that hinted at a deliberate choreography. At one particularly unnerving intersection, a semi-truck came to a sudden halt mere inches away from a cluster of blocks that seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. The driver's face was a mask of shock and disbelief, and for a few agonizing seconds, the air inside the truck cab felt as if it were charged with static electricity. Michael's pulse soared as he witnessed the silent drama unfold, an everyday event transformed into a tableau of surreal terror. As he neared his destination, a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the morning's events were only the prelude to something far more complex and disturbing. The quiet residential streets, lined with neatly kept lawns and orderly houses, provided a stark contrast to the chaotic imagery of the highway. Yet, beneath the veneer of suburban calm, an undercurrent of tension pulsed, as though the mystery of the stray blocks had seeped into every corner of his world. That night, as Michael sat alone in his small, dimly lit living room, he pored over the photographs and scribbled down notes in a battered journal. The red arrow on the faded image burned in his memory like a beacon, urging him to dig deeper into the building's past and its possible connection to the highway phenomenon. Outside his window, the city hummed with the usual nocturnal rhythms, but inside, a different cadence prevailed, a steady, determined heartbeat that pushed him toward the unknown. Every creak of the old floorboards and every distant sound of traffic in the night became part of a larger narrative that Michael was desperate to understand. The blocks, with their silent message and mysterious presence, had sparked something within him, a need to confront the uncomfortable possibility that the mundane was a facade, behind which lay secrets that defied logic and reason. In that quiet, introspective hour, Michael resolved to uncover the truth, even if it meant stepping into realms of uncertainty and unease that he had never imagined existed. With the photographs spread out before him and his thoughts racing, Michael drafted plans for the coming days. He would return to the abandoned building, delve into local archives, and speak with anyone who might have knowledge of these recurring anomalies. He recalled the weathered tales from truck drivers and old-timers, the stories that had once seemed like urban legends, now emerging as potential fragments of reality. The feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying, a realization that his life had been forever altered by a sequence of events that began on an otherwise unremarkable morning. As the night deepened and the city's bustle receded into a distant murmur, Michael felt a stirring of resolve mixed with dread. The stray blocks had served as a stark reminder that even in the most familiar routines, the unexpected could manifest without warning, shattering the illusion of normalcy. And as he finally drifted into a restless sleep, the image of the red arrow, the echoing hum of the highway, and the cryptic words of that grizzled attendant merged into a single, haunting vision, one that promised to pull him deeper into the mystery with every passing day. The boundary between reality and the inexplicable had blurred irreversibly for Michael. The highway, once just a means to an end, now stood as a symbol of the unpredictable forces at play in a world that was far more complex and mysterious than he had ever believed. And in that fragile space between waking and dreaming, the promise of revelation mingled with the fear of what might ultimately be uncovered, leaving him to wonder whether some truths were better left undiscovered. Michael's determination grew with the dawn of a new day. The previous night's revelations churned in his mind like a restless tide, compelling him to return to the abandoned building with renewed purpose. At first light, he drove back along the highway, its routine hum now tinged with the weight of hidden significance. The stray blocks, those silent sentinels, had receded into the distance as the morning reclaimed the road, yet their presence lingered in his thoughts like an unresolved chord. Arriving at the building once more, Michael found that its aura of desolation had only deepened with time. The structure stood as an echo of a bygone era, its cracked walls and broken windows whispering secrets of long-forgotten days. Inside, the building's interior was shrouded in an eerie half-light, where motes of dust danced in the beams of a weak sunrise. Michael moved slowly through the empty corridors, his footsteps muted by layers of neglect. Every creak of the aged floorboards and every distant drip of water from a leaky roof played a symphony of decay that underscored the isolation of this relic. In the main hall, he returned to the table where he had previously discovered the scattered photographs. This time, however, he noticed something new, a faded ledger tucked behind a loose brick in the wall, as if it had been hidden deliberately. The ledger, its pages brittle with age, contained handwritten entries, dates, and a series of cryptic notes that hinted at clandestine operations linked to the highway's construction decades ago. Michael's heart raced as he pored over the entries, the words barrier, protection, and sacrifice repeatedly emerging in a looping refrain. It was as though the ledger was trying to tell him that the blocks were not a modern phenomenon at all, but a recurring measure, instituted by those who had once believed that the highway was more than mere concrete and asphalt. With the ledger in hand, Michael felt both a surge of hope and a tightening of dread. The discovery confirmed that he was not merely chasing an isolated incident but was instead caught up in a deeper, historical mystery. The entries alluded to a time when local communities had banded together against forces they barely understood, forces that threatened the very fabric of their daily lives. Michael's mind raced with questions. Who had orchestrated these measures? What exactly were they protecting the public from? And why had the same method reappeared now, in an era defined by technology and rationality? Determined to piece together this puzzle, Michael set out for the local archives, a modest, ivy-covered building nestled among the older neighborhoods of the city. Inside, the scent of aged paper and polished wood filled the air, a stark contrast to the musty decay of the abandoned building. He sought out a local historian, a bespectacled gentleman with kind eyes and a mind as sharp as the faded headlines that lined the archive walls. Over a pot of bitter, steaming coffee in a cramped back room, the historian recounted fragments of a past that had been meticulously erased from popular memory. He explained that, many years ago, when the highway was first expanded, strange incidents had begun to occur. There were whispered rumors of accidents that defied explanation, vehicles that had inexplicably stalled, and drivers who swore they had seen inexplicable shapes on the road. In an attempt to quell public fear and maintain order, local authorities and community leaders had covertly organized a series of measures. The stray blocks were their creation, a physical barrier meant to signal that something was being kept at bay, a silent warning that no one was to venture beyond the boundary of safety. The historian's voice, heavy with the weight of unspoken tragedies, lent credence to Michael's growing conviction that the phenomenon was as old as the road itself. The historian's narrative wove together tales of lost lives and near misses, of decisions made in desperate meetings held under the cloak of darkness. Each anecdote was more chilling than the last, painting a picture of a community under siege by forces that were as intangible as they were relentless. Michael listened, enraptured and horrified, as the historian described how, in the aftermath of each mysterious event, the highway was subtly altered, a few concrete blocks repositioned or added, always with the singular aim of containing something no one dared name. The stories were punctuated by sharp contrasts, moments of ordinary camaraderie among neighbors set against the backdrop of inexplicable calamities that had shattered their sense of security. Armed with this newfound understanding, Michael left the archives with the ledger and a head full of questions. The day's light had begun to wane as he drove back along the highway, its familiar rhythm now overlaid with a palpable tension. The blocks, now clearly part of a historical continuum rather than a modern accident, took on an even more ominous role in his mind. They were not merely relics of a past effort, they were living markers, a legacy of fear and protection that transcended time. Back in his modest apartment, Michael spread out all the evidence before him, the ledger, the photographs with their red arrow, and the detailed notes he'd taken during his conversations with the historian. As dusk crept in through his window, casting elongated shadows across the room, he meticulously compared dates, cross-referenced events, and sought patterns in the seemingly disparate clues. The juxtaposition of the mundane and the extraordinary was now undeniable. The ledger's entries, scrawled in a hurried, almost desperate hand, hinted at a cyclical recurrence of events. Each cycle was marked by the sudden appearance of the blocks, followed by a period of unease and inexplicable incidents that eventually subsided into a deceptive calm. The flickering light of his desk lamp illuminated the pages, making the ink seem to pulse with a life of its own. Michael could almost hear the echoes of voices from decades past, the murmurs of community meetings held in secret, the hurried instructions of officials determined to safeguard the collective well-being, and the whispered fears of drivers who had witnessed the blocks firsthand. The narrative was not linear, it was a tapestry of memories, emotions, and actions that spanned generations. And now, as he sat amid the quiet hum of the night, Michael realized that he was standing at a crossroads. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but it also promised a chance to understand a mystery that had long haunted the highway and its travelers. In that quiet, contemplative moment, Michael felt a profound shift within himself. The ordinary life he had known, one marked by routine drives and predictable encounters, had been irrevocably transformed by the collision of past and present, the tangible and the elusive. The stray blocks were more than a protective measure, they were a symbol of humanity's perpetual struggle against forces that defied explanation, a reminder that even in a world governed by logic, there were realms where the unknown reigned supreme. As the night deepened, Michael's resolve solidified. Tomorrow, he would return to the highway and the abandoned building with fresh questions and a determination to uncover the full extent of the mystery. Until then, the images of the blocks, the haunting ledger entries, and the historian's solemn tales would continue to echo in his mind, a ceaseless reminder that sometimes, the line between the everyday and the extraordinary is drawn not with ink, but with concrete. Michael awoke the next morning with a lingering sense of inevitability, a final chapter to be written in a story that had already reshaped his understanding of the highway. The drive to the familiar stretch of road felt like an initiation, as if each mile carried him closer to the truth behind the stray blocks and their inexplicable power. The concrete sentinels stood in silent formation along the roadside, their presence no longer an anomaly but a testament to decisions made long ago by people who, like him now, had faced a crisis of faith in the ordinary. As he navigated the highway, Michael's mind replayed the ledger's cryptic entries and the historian's somber tales. Each note, every fragment of overheard conversation, converged into a quiet certainty. These blocks had been a deliberate intervention, a line drawn in concrete to ward off an undefined danger. The danger was not supernatural, he reassured himself, it was the palpable risk of human error, of forces beyond control that could transform a routine drive into a catastrophe. And in that subtle, almost imperceptible way, the blocks had been an act of protection, a silent pact between a community and the uncertainties of life. The day unfolded with an almost ritualistic precision. Michael slowed as he approached a section of the highway where the blocks were arranged in a formation that mirrored a pattern he had seen before in the ledger, a deliberate configuration meant to channel traffic away from a known hazard. In this section, the concrete obstacles were flanked by emergency reflectors and hastily erected signage that even the most experienced drivers recognized as a warning. There was no overt panic in the drivers' faces now, only a subdued caution that spoke of hard-earned wisdom. In a moment of reflective clarity, Michael recalled the gas station attendant's words, "They show up sometimes. Always in different places, but always the same. And when they do, something doesn't get through." That simple phrase had echoed through the long nights spent poring over records and fragments of local law. Today, it resonated with a sober truth. Each block was a boundary, a demarcation between the safe and the perilous, a last-ditch effort to hold back forces that, if left unchecked, could spill into everyday life. He pulled over near one of these configurations, the engine of his car humming softly as he sat on the curb, absorbing the scene. The highway was a familiar ribbon of asphalt, yet now it felt charged with unspoken history. A couple of drivers, their eyes reflective and voices low, exchanged nods and murmurs of understanding as they passed by. Michael watched a school bus creep slowly along the road, its driver's hand steady on the wheel, a silent acknowledgement of the block's presence and what they represented. In that fleeting tableau, he sensed a communal bond forged through shared, unspoken experiences. The day wore on, and Michael resumed his journey with a renewed resolve to document what he had learned. His camera, an old model that had accompanied him on countless trips, captured the interplay of light and shadow over the blocks. Every shot was a testament to their stark geometry against the sprawling backdrop of the highway and the distant hum of passing vehicles. In these images, he believed, lay clues not only to the block's origin but to the enduring human impulse to protect and preserve order in an unpredictable world. That evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the horizon in hues of amber and violet, Michael returned to the abandoned building one final time. The structure, once a silent witness to his early inquiries, now stood as a mausoleum of secrets that had been partially unveiled. Inside, amid the dust and the remnants of past lives, he found a folded letter tucked into the ledger, a final missive, written in careful, deliberate script. The letter spoke of a time when local authorities, burdened by the weight of inexplicable tragedies, had constructed these barriers as both a warning and a safeguard. It detailed a plan born of desperation, aimed at preventing a recurrence of events that had once claimed lives and shattered communities. As he read the letter under the flickering light of a single, weak bulb, Michael felt a mix of sorrow and relief. The mystery was not solved in the neat, cinematic manner he had once imagined, but it was explained in fragments that resonated with the cold logic of human error and the determination to shield the vulnerable. The blocks were not magical talismans nor artifacts of an otherworldly force. They were, instead, a practical measure, born of fear and necessity, to keep chaos at bay. Stepping back into the cool night air, Michael felt the weight of that legacy settle around him. The abandoned building, the ledger, the whispered warnings of the gas station, and the historian, all of these elements formed a mosaic of human resilience in the face of an ever-present threat. The highway, that once benign conduit of everyday life, had become a living reminder of the sacrifices made in silence, of the measures taken to ensure that ordinary drivers might reach home safely despite the undercurrents of uncertainty. In the final moments of that day, as Michael drove home under a sky strewn with stars, he felt a quiet kinship with every soul who had ever taken to the road. The stray blocks had not only left drivers momentarily stunned, they had united them in a tacit understanding that life's unpredictability demanded vigilance, that sometimes the boundaries between safety and danger must be drawn with unyielding concrete. Though the mystery would continue to haunt him in quiet moments, Michael also recognized the profound beauty in its revelation. There was an honor in knowing that, in a world where chaos could lurk behind the ordinary, someone had once dared to construct a barrier against it, a barrier that, in its silent watchfulness, safeguarded lives. And so, with his heart both heavy and hopeful, Michael pressed on, carrying with him the legacy of the stray blocks, a legacy that, though shrouded in enigma, was as real and resolute as the highway stretching endlessly into the night.